Well, this is my late review of what we've read over the past week in Isaiah. What we've done is finished up reading Isaiah, and we've read the whole book of Jeremiah. And I kind of want to cover those two things in one video here, and I kind of want to introduce Ezekiel in the end of this video. Understanding these three are the major prophets. These are the biggest prophetic books. They're the biggest prophets and while some of the other prophets had a singular message to a singular person, like Jonah had a message for Assyria eventually, and then as we study prophets like Amos and Hosea, they have a single message. Now, these major prophets we have is, I don't want to say a biography, but we get to know them a little bit better. Isaiah gives us a range in the introduction of his, in chapter 1. It says between the reigns of Uzziah and Hezekiah, and actually, we get we have some other manuscripts that put him into the time of Manasseh, which is Hezekiah's son, who was evil. But I don't really want to talk about that. What I want to talk about is the theme of these books, because it's really important that we understand the prophets and their roles when we get to Jesus, because a lot of what we understand Jesus saying is retelling of a lot of the stuff that the prophets said. And I want to show you in Deuteronomy where Moses said all of this already. So what Jeremiah or Isaiah kind of began, Jeremiah continued, was living out what Deuteronomy 32 says. So if you want to turn in your Bible to Deuteronomy 32 and read along with me, I want to show you something. In Deuteronomy 32:15, it says Jeshurun. Now, my Bible here has a note there. It says Jeshurun means the upright one, that is Israel. So, and we have a lot of metaphor and symbolism in the Bible where you have a word or a name that means something for something else, and there's a lot of that in the prophets, especially Ezekiel. He's got a whole lot of sign acts when we get to him. But it says Jeshurun grew fat and kicked, filled with food, and they became heavy and sleek. They abandoned the God who made them and rejected the rock, their Savior. And then for the next 15 or 20 verses here, he tells you exactly what we've read over the last week in Isaiah and Jeremiah. It says, they made him jealous, talking about God. They made God jealous with their foreign gods. They angered him with their detestable idols. They sacrificed false gods, which are not God, the gods they had not known. Gods that recently appeared. So these aren't even the gods that were from old. These are newly made things. These are new ideas. Gods your ancestors did not fear. You deserted the rock who fathered you. You forgot the God who gave you birth. The Lord saw this and rejected them, because he was angered by his sons and daughters. Verse 20, it explains what's going on. I will hide my face from them, he said, and see what their end will be. They are a perverse generation, children who are unfaithful. They made me jealous by what is no God, and angered me with their worthless idols. I will make them envious by those who are not a people. This is Assyria, and this is Babylon. Not a people. I will make them angry by a nation that has no understanding. For a fire will be kindled by my wrath, one that burns down to the realm of the dead below. It will devour the earth and its harvests, and set afire the foundations of the mountains. I will heap calamities on them. I will spend my arrows against them. I will send wasting famine against them, consuming pestilence and deadly plague. I will send against them the fangs of wild beasts, the venom of vipers that glide in the dust. And I think there's also some symbolism that goes in with that too. Vipers that go in the dust, like chariots or whatever kind of stuff they would have. Fangs of wild beasts would be like maybe siege machines, things that you'd build to topple a wall or to climb a wall. In the streets, the sword will make them childless. Now that clearly happened when we were reading Jeremiah. It was unthinkable to see Jerusalem fall the way it did. And I think that when they thought about, when they would think about if they would have got the law, they would think that this, or when they heard this initially, when Moses sang this to them, and as his last, remember we were reading Deuteronomy, it was Moses' last sermon. This was his last words, was warning them about what would happen, what the future was, and to cling to their God, and they could never do it. I said I would scatter them and erase their name from human memory, but I dreaded the taunt of the enemy, lest the adversary misunderstand and say, our hand has triumphed. The Lord Yahweh has not done all this. And that explains the destruction of Assyria after the Assyrians were able to destroy Israel. And when I say Israel, I mean the 10 tribes. God led Assyria, or built up Assyria to do that, and then he used Babylon to destroy Assyria. And then he used Babylon to punish Jerusalem, and then he used Persia and Media, the Medes and the Persians, to destroy Babylon. And what they did was really just took it over. And then eventually, later in the Second Temple period, after Jerusalem comes back, Alexander the Great comes in. Now that narrative is covered in apocryphal books. It talks about the Maccabean Revolution, and it talks about Alexander the Great in Maccabees. It talks about Alexander the Great's conquest. And if you study Western civilization, you'll understand that all of this history is actual. This isn't some made-up story. All of this conquest, God said, "Well, you wanna live under nations? I'll make you live under nations." You know, they never got it. They never understood what it meant to be God's chosen people. What this tells us is that Israel was intended to be the heartbeat of the world, the heart of the world, the blood that keeps the world in a relationship with God, and that's what Israel is. That's what this whole book is about. It's about God having a called out people to be the representatives of Him in this world, and when He had this nation, they just wanted to be like everybody else. We don't want this. We want to do what we just want to do. We need a king. We need to be ruled, and we're gonna serve God the way we want to. And if we want to make little idols and bow down to them, that's what we want to do. Well, God, the word used here is jealousy. God is jealous of those things. It said. But here's a picture of his jealousy in verse 30. How could one man chase 1,000 or put 10,000 to flight unless their rock had sold them? And that's exactly what happened when they came. They were just completely destroyed. For their rock is not like our rock, and even as enemies concede, Their vine comes from the vine of Sodom, and the fields from the fields of Gomorrah. And that's what he always warned them about, is don't let those people influence you. My mother always told me when I was a kid, she said, I want you, this is the best advice, I want you to make the difference. Don't let the difference make you. Those words have stuck with me, and it's really, paraphrased biblical. I want you to make the difference. Don't let the difference make you. And pretty much saying that you're going to encounter this false worship. You're going to encounter this false godliness. Their grapes are filled with poison, and their clusters with bitterness. Their wine is the venom of serpents and the deadly poison of cobras. Have I not kept this in reserve, filled in my vaults? It is mine to avenge, I will repay. Now look, if you were reading this and you were on God's side, you would think, surely God is talking about someone else. He's not talking about us. We can't be ignorant about the things that God clearly tells us. The day of disaster is near, and the doom rushes upon them. The Lord will vindicate his people. And this is saying that he's not going to. So he's going to let them attack you, and then he's going to destroy them to show that it wasn't them. They weren't able to destroy Jerusalem and Israel in their own power. So, and that God is the God. He's the creator. And something that you set up as something to worship that isn't God is not acceptable. It is not, you're giving credit to something that can't accept credit. And that's where so much idle talk is going on in the Bible, in the prophets, in Isaiah and Jeremiah, and especially Ezekiel. If you don't understand what's going on now, Ezekiel is going to blow your mind. Okay, so but what's happening in Isaiah, I've did some reading in some commentaries. I'm reading in the Word Biblical Commentary. John Watts writes, Isaiah treats troubles not as threats against God and his people, but as judgments inspired and led by God himself against his people and the nations. They are therefore not victims, but the punished. As has been true with the troubles, so with solutions, Israel, Jerusalem, and the nations can only hope in God's work on their behalf to rebuild Jerusalem. Reassembled Israelites would bring worshipers from the nations to the temple. That's saying, that's an academic saying what I'm telling you right now. That anytime something bad happens to us, we see ourselves as a victim. And when we see ourselves as a victim, we start to throw excuses. Well, this happened because of this, and we did this because of this, and we did that, and all this happened because of this. And what really happened was they let others influence them. We need to examine in our own lives what is influencing us. And if it's not godly, we need to get it out of our lives. We need to have good, solid influence. We need to not be worshiping things that aren't worth worshiping. We need to have God in the forefront, the forehead of our mind at all times. And things that distract us, we need to start to cut out of our lives. I've got another note here saying that neither Israel nor Judah is any longer a kingdom with his own king and land, no longer a 12-tribe confederation, intimate covenant with God, its Father. Jerusalem is a city for pilgrims, for humbled, scattered people. But Isaiah claims that Yahweh is the king in the temple at Uzziah's death. Over the Assyrian, a king over the Assyrian Empire in his armies, and king over the kings. God is this is where we're talking, King of Kings language that we use actually makes sense. God is in control. Isaiah gives us a picture of God in control of everything. Okay, so it's absolutely futile to think that God is in a thing made. My mom makes these wonderful coffee cups. I love them. But I don't worship them. I don't bow down to a thing. And if it breaks, I might be sad, but I'm not gonna I'm not gonna mourn it like I would a child or a person. It's coffee. It's just coffee. It's something that we consume. King over the Assyrian Empire and his armies, king over the kings, the land, the world, and Leviathan, chapters 24 through 26. King over death. He's the king over death in chapter 25. He's the king over his people in chapter 33. The king over his servant Israel. He's the king over the servant Cyrus. That's Babylon. And all the land. That's chapters 45 through 48. King over the suffering servant. That's Jesus. 49 and through 54. King over the servants of Yahweh, and those are the prophets. King over the temple on his mountain. That's Jerusalem, and king over the new heavens and the new earth. That's 65. Where we have a book like Matthew that says that Jesus is the Lord of Lords and the King of Kings. That is saying that Jesus is not only the King of heaven, but the King of Rome. The King of... So these are huge claims, okay? Note how the concepts of king and servant imply each other. That when that had been implicit with Davidic king leading worship in the temple, which is now proclaimed as explicit fact, proved by historical events. The turn from emphasis on the Davidic king to Yahweh as king parallels the situation in Psalms and Proverbs. Isaiah emphasizes this change through his treatments with the term trust. So you have servant, king. You have king that means servant. And you always have David and Solomon using languages like "I will serve you in the courts and in the temple," and this is the king. And keep in mind that David and Solomon were mighty kings. They weren't contemporary with kings like the king of Tyre and the king of Sidon and the king of... These guys were elevated. They were especially Solomon, in all of his wisdom and all of his splendor, and all the other kings looked to him to what a king should look like. And he's only the third king of Israel, and so far we have the mightiest king that was ever possible. And if it was in their own power, they would never be able to keep it. And that's what happened in the end of Solomon's time. It all fell away from them. And then we have the need for these prophets to bring this scathing message of Deuteronomy 32 back to these people that are running apostate. They're running away from God. Isaiah turns thus a highly interactive drama that draws the readers and his hearers into the action and speeches on stage. We, the readers, from the first hearers on, are addressed, given lines to read or sing. And they claim, so he's including his audience, his readers. Isaiah is a masterpiece of literature. They aim to shape our self-identity and directs our hopes. We are a remnant of the community of survivors. We are struck with the indictments in the chapters 1, 65, and 66. You feel it when you read Isaiah. You feel it. You feel the problems that are going on. in Jerusalem and Israel. The book recognizes that rebellious children are condemned to die, but Yahweh, the Father, the Heavenly Father, urges them to change their ways. We see this in 1:15 through 17, and he offers complete absolution for those that do. In chapter 1, verses 18 and 19. So he says, "Turn back to me." That's the first thing God always says, and that's what he tells every preacher, every teacher, every evangelist, every Christian to proclaim this message of, please turn back to God. Please turn back to God, because he will destroy you if you don't. That's the message. That's the message to the nations then. That's the gospel message, because God has redeemed us with his Son since this time. We have the one that Isaiah was talking about, the suffering servant. He actually came. They said he's coming. They said he's coming. They said he's coming. He came, and they rejected him, but he came nonetheless. And there is a remnant that believes, and that's who we are as Bible believers. This sets in line the division between those who come to God's enemies, who must be purged, and the penitents who would be restored and redeemed. Thus salvation will belong to a remnant only. That was true then, and it's true now. It's only the believing remnant that will be saved. It's only Israel. Whether you're Israel or born in or adopted into, grafted into Israel from the Gentile church, and that's even promised in Isaiah's message. Getting on to Jeremiah, guys. Jeremiah was a hard book to read because of how chopped up it was. I was even finding myself confused and in it, and my comments on the book as a whole would say that Jeremiah doesn't give us much about Jeremiah. It's a lot straight about God, and then the prophecies that he gave to Baruch, especially in the last 2 or 3 chapters, in the last 3 chapters, where he had told Baruch to write down this prophecy that he had against Babylon and take it to Babylon. Well, that turned out, it was like a modern movie where you saw the end at the beginning and you see the beginning at the end. You know what I mean? It was where you have this. He says, take this thing, and when you get taken in captivity, and he ended up getting taken when Zerubbabel got taken, when he got taken away, like 20 years ago. So you have the old scene where he says, go and read this. When you get to Babylon, read this, and then tie a rock to this thing, seal it, and throw it into the Euphrates, and say that this is now sealed. And they had another copy of that. So, I mean, it's just so serious. But one thing that I noticed about that prophecy against Babylon, it said that Babylon would be completely destroyed, and it has been. Archaeology has found Babylon and found the tiles and the things that they had there in the Middle East there. They found the heap that was Babylon, and they found the heap that was Nineveh, and those prophecies were ultimately true. But the way that I was reading it, that language sounds so much like Revelation. It sounds like the Revelation language of the prophecy that of the end of the new earth, and there's this promise of a perfect world after that. I really believe that heaven is the new earth. Now, people, I don't want to get into doctrine too much, because people have different beliefs on what heaven is. Heaven is the new heaven and the new earth that comes later. It's kind of an already but not yet. It's already been promised, and it's able to come to us, but it's not yet here. It's not yet here because it's not ready, because the mission has not been completed. The kingdom mission of Matthew 28 is not completed yet. We still have people to reach before it is able to, before Jesus will come back. It's not that we have to do works, but there is a mission, and time isn't. I think that time isn't really a factor in it. I think that it's when the last nations are brought to Christ, when the last possible people are brought to Christ, it'll be enough. And the devil's job is to delay that. The devil's job in the world is to keep that from happening, because when that happens, it's over for him. And that's what's been written. I've got some notes about Jeremiah just to help kind of clear this up. And this is also from the Word Biblical Commentary. This is Peter Craigie, who wrote this great commentary. Now, these are academic commentaries. These aren't commentaries that you would probably want, because they do a lot of the language. They talk about the original language. They go into the Hebrew. Academic commentaries are extremely hard to read, especially if you don't know much about the language, but are some serious gems in them. The modern reader of the book of Jeremiah is faced at the outset with a difficult task that has survived. Is not a book in the normal sense of that word. It does not move from the beginning to end. It's not a story, and that's one of the frustrating things about Jeremiah. Following a clear logic and an inner development, it doesn't do that. Indeed, the major portion of the substance of this book was never designed for the literary context in which it has survived. The stuff of which Jeremiah's book is constructed is started life in various contexts, ranging from public proclamation to a private diary. So we have everything that he wrote. Well, not everything, but it's a compilation of things that we know about Jeremiah. What we are dealing with then in reading the book of Jeremiah is a book that is essentially an anthology. Oh, that's what I just said, or more precisely, an anthology of anthologies. And the collection of anthologies brings together a number of sayings and writings that were associated with the prophet, binding them together in a single volume. That really helped me make sense. Just hearing that helped me make sense of what I was reading in Jeremiah. But whereas modern anthologies provide guidance to its readers by the extensive use of titles, notes, and headings, only a few such aids reading have survived in Jeremiah. Furthermore, by the logic by which this collection of anthologies was compiled, it can only be partially reconstructed, so that the reader cannot always determine the reason for the sequence and arrangement of the materials that comprise the whole. I think that if you would drive yourself mad if you tried to sequence Jeremiah, and that's what he's saying. What he's saying ultimately in this introduction to his commentary on the book, what he's saying is, I'm not trying to do that. I'm not trying to put this together, because I'm not going to drive myself mad doing it. But what I will do is comment on what we can know. Guys, we can follow rabbit trails until we're blue in the face, and if we don't know how to get back to the truth from there, we are lost. We get lost as a football bat. We just can't get right. So don't read things like they weren't intended to be reading. What we have is pretty much like an archaeological find of several pieces of things that are compiled together as the book of Jeremiah, and we can piece together some of it, like, because he gives us some clues, especially like that last chapter. The last line of 51 says the words of Jeremiah end here. And then they kind of summarized in chapter 52 the fall of Jerusalem. I'm going to read this other note. I don't remember exactly what it was, but these things, I wanted to share these little notes with you. These are all from the Word Biblical Commentary introductions to these two books. And if you want to know exactly where this is, I'll give you the footnotes. Although it is not an easy task to simply read the book of Jeremiah, given in the form that which its subject matter has survived, nevertheless, and it is an indisputable fact, taken at face value, but a partial but striking picture of the prophet emerges from the pages of the book named after him. So it wasn't written as like a biography. This is not the biography of Jeremiah. This is just words and sayings. But as we have read it, we get a picture of the weeping, the weeping prophet. That's what we always call Jeremiah. He's the weeping prophet, the one that cried. And he cried. I mean, I just couldn't imagine, the depression and the stuff that he went through, the way that he felt. Because only one or two people ever even respected Jeremiah. He was, when I think of Jeremiah, I think of the crazy man on the street with the sign on his thing and says, the end of the world is near, that knows he's crazy and he's just out there and he's got some prophecy that's probably not going to come true. And how many, I remember that's an image of, I guess, some stuff I saw when I was a kid. You don't see it as much, and you really should see it more. The end is near. And when we see that and laugh at it, it's really kind of, but he's that guy. He's the guy that can't get respect from anybody. You see him, people laugh at him when they see him. And unlike many of the biblical prophets who remain perpetually as figures in the shadows of history, Jeremiah stands out as a truly human figure. That's what I mean when I'm saying that he seems like the guy on the street, the crazy guy on the street. When I lived in Pueblo, Colorado, we lived right down the street from what used to be the state hospital, and before that it was an insane asylum. And there were halfway houses near where I lived, and there were people who I loved, who I absolutely loved them. They would sleep on my porch at times, and they were just crazy people. They were people that had been, I want to say, chemically castrated in their minds, but they were decent people who didn't get a good shake. And that's the type of people that I really love, is people that need the love that people can share, and people that appreciate it. And nobody does that like crazy people. and if you know what I'm talking about, you know what I'm saying. But if you don't, you're probably like, man, what is Mike going off on? And that's okay. You can figure it out on your own if you like, or you can just take my word for it. Either way, Jeremiah stands out as a truly human figure. He is now not like Elijah and Elisha, where they have the power of God to at their disposal. Jeremiah has the power of pain. Torn between faith, he is torn between faith and doubt. He is deeply involved in the contemporary affairs of his time, so he did care about the politics that were going on. And in the pages of his book, he passes from youth to old age against the backdrop of history of the history of his era. Yet any such picture of the prophet is all in its heroic and tragic dimensions. It is clearly dependent on one's interpretation of the book named after Jeremiah, and as we have already observed, the interpretation of the many sources that comprise the book is encompassed by immense difficulties. So what we can know about Jeremiah is that he is the time that he lived, which would have been after Israel was destroyed, or right at that time is kind of when he started, up to the time of the after 586 BC, when they ran away to Egypt and they dragged him with them. Remember, they said, consult God for us, and they did. So you have Jeremiah in Jerusalem the whole time, and then he goes away to buy that field, and then he gets arrested and thrown in jail in the house there, and where he was going to die. And they let him out, and then he went into a cistern, and then they let him out, and then the end came, and then after that they killed the governor that Nebuchadnezzar had put over there, so they were in trouble, so they all fled to Egypt, and that's when the prophecy came against Egypt. Okay. And this last note I've got here: it is certainly clear that whoever assembled the book of Jeremiah in its form did not do so in order to provide us a life of the prophet, viewed as a biography. The book of Jeremiah would be incomplete, inadequate, unchronological, and generally unsatisfactory. But when the biographical and historical narratives are seen in their rightful place, supplementing the prophetic word to make possible a deeper understanding, then one is not being too uncritical in accepting with caution the historical implications of the ancient text. So when we do find where these pieces go in history, and those are really good, because Ezekiel and Jeremiah are a puzzle. They go together in a way that that you have, just the way I see it, you have Jeremiah in Jerusalem, and you have Ezekiel in Babylon, and their lives are nearly parallel. They never meet each other that we know of, but they do have. Ezekiel has some kind of vision, and it's like astral projection of what's happening in Jerusalem at time. It's like Ezekiel can see through Jeremiah's eyes, and I don't know if it was the same. I didn't catch the same kind of rhetoric there, but you kind of did. You did see for a little bit of time that Jeremiah talked about the condition of the people in captivity. It's so interesting, guys. One of the many one may reasonably suppose that apart from a few autobiographical notes from the prophet himself, the tradition of supplementing the record of the prophet's word began with Baruch. The narrative contained in Jeremiah 36 is the basis for such a view. You know, when we talked about him having Baruch, his scribe, the guy that scribed those letters for him, had him write that thing down, and then he got taken. Baruch was taken into captivity, so Baruch has gone to Babylon from then on, and Jeremiah has stayed and left there. Well, guys, the prophets, you might not understand everything they say and do, but you have to. What we should get from the prophets is that it should not have been a surprise to the people that they went into captivity, and why. Even from Deuteronomy 32, this message was told by Moses, that's what kept Joshua on track, because Joshua absolutely believed Moses. Joshua spent time with Moses and God in the tent of meeting, and God was with Joshua. And I don't know why nobody stepped up when Joshua stepped down, but I think that the heads of the tribes were supposed to do that, but there was really not a leader from then on, and not having a leader, their prophets were hit and miss. If you call the judges are not prophets, but they did have prophets type, especially when they got to Samuel. Guys, the Bible is such an amazing story. It's such it's something that you can really, I was watching the Star Wars. I finally watched all the, I've always loved Star Wars. It's a great epic story. But they're able to write whatever they want. That world is a dualist philosophy. The Star Wars universe. I don't get so much into the X-Men stuff, but the Star Wars stuff has always intrigued me because of its virtue and its morality. And even the newer movies were pretty good, but they're not as well rounded as the Bible is. The Bible is complete. Y'all saw that picture that I posted in the group the other day about all the cross references. When we get into the New Testament and through it, that's when all of this stuff starts just really making sense. All the ties from the New Testament to the Old Testament, and then you start to see that the Old Testament was talking about the New Testament this whole time, and it's just this amazing book. It's so amazing. It's not a book; it's a library. The terrible video that I did to introduce this whole thing, the introduction to the Bible in 90 days, I talked about how just awesome this is. and I'm telling you, this enthusiasm that you get for the Bible is just, it helps you to know God. We can know God because He's given us this ability to know Him. Well, I've carried on a little bit extra from what I normally do with these reviews. I hope that we understand what we're getting into with the prophets. They're very confusing because their setting is so important to what they're saying and who they're talking to, but their message is timeless. I mean, the things about God have never changed. And as we get into this further, I do want to talk about how God, how some people think nowadays that there was a God of the Old Testament and there's a different God of the New Testament, and we'll talk about that in future reviews. Well, brothers and sisters, God loves you. I love you too. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.